Hey, listeners, thank you for tuning in again to another episode of the Whiskering Podcast. This may be episode 100. We are right around that number, including bonus episodes that have come out. Thank you so much for listening for all this time. I cannot tell you how much it means to me. So, thank you. A couple of quick updates, and then we'll jump right into the episode. First off, we have now picked our 2 barrels of Jack Daniel's Barrel Proof Rye. I was down in Nashville in June, picked 2 barrels that were completely different from each other, but both just knocked our socks off. So those are going to be going live sometime in the early fall. I will keep you up to date on that. Number 2, we have multiple other barrel picks coming. The first one that's probably going to come out is going to be a barrel rye finished in Armagnac casks. This was chosen in partnership with Perry over at This Is My Bourbon Podcast. So you co-listeners are really going to love that. And we are brainstorming some sticker ideas right now that is going to make it even more attractive for your shelf. Hopefully you'll drink it, but it'll be good for the shelf too. Another barrel pick coming out, Spirits of French Lick, is getting chosen as we speak, and I'll keep you updated on that. Last thing, and then I'll let you go right into the episode, is during my last update, I mentioned that there were 4 spots available at that top tier of $25 a month. At $25 a month on Patreon, you get not only first access to, well, everything, and access to everything that I put out, but you also get top tier priority for barrel picks when they come out. You also get the opportunity to join me on a barrel pick. Already, we've had members of that tier down with me in Nashville for the Jack Daniel's pick, helping out on the Spirits of French Lick pick, and also giving some input on the barrel pick. So every pick from now and going forward is going to have a Patreon member, at least one from that tier, on the pick with us. As of today, there is only 1 spot remaining in that $25 tier. So if you've been holding out, if you're pushing it off for any reason, I'd say jump on it, because this spot is probably going to go quickly. With that, I'll say, of course, if the $25 is out of your range right now, we still want you to be a supporter. We still want you to be involved. The next tier down, $5 a month, is going to get you that second access to all barrel picks. I can't speak for the $25 tier, but pretty sure there'll still be some barrels and bottles available for you at the $5 a month tier. That just really helps us grow, covers expenses, and keeps the podcast going with these awesome guests that we've got. All right, I have talked for almost 3 minutes. That is a ton of time. I am sorry for that, but with that, that's all the updates for this month. I'll keep you updated as they go along. Now, here's a new episode of the Whiskering Podcast. Hey, folks, welcome to a new episode of the Whiskering Podcast. I'm thrilled to be joined by Mr. John Cubelic, who is from Dread River Distilling. And if you haven't heard of them, it's because we haven't gone to Alabama on this podcast just yet. You beat out Clyde Mays by probably a couple of weeks because you answered the emails first, and here we are. So he's here to talk about Dread River, about distilling in Alabama, what you can and can't do there, and everything having to go into the history of Birmingham. So, John, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. And never want to beat our neighbors, but happy we snuck in before them. That's exciting.
I know you've got some friendly competition. Each state within state has their friendly competition between producers, but if you want to be first, you want to be first. It's okay. So let's just dive right in. So Alabama, again, this first time we're going there on this podcast. We're now in the second century of episodes. So there's not a lot of distilleries in Alabama, as far as I know. I didn't do a ton of research on it, but I know there's not a ton of them out there. Certainly not doing many, commercial level. Yeah. So what kind of encapsulates the history of distilling in Alabama? Like, was there a distilling history before you guys came around?
Yeah, so ironically, we've made this joke numerous times, and I have no history in distilling prior to this business for me. So all of this has been a learning experience for me in Alabama and otherwise. But pre-Prohibition, there was actually quite a lot of distilling that happened in Alabama. Jack Daniel's had a distillery in Birmingham. So as I'm sure most of your listeners know, we get the old number 7 part of Jack Daniel's now that is the one that everybody sees. But there was a time that there were several other numbers. And so I forget, it was either number 4 or number 5 was distilled in Birmingham back before they kind of consolidated into the one product that they make still today. So they spread out quite a lot. We have this kind of running joke in the distillery that we have we've now released the first bourbon distilled in Birmingham in over 100 years, so pre-prohibition. The joke part is we are the first legally distilled bourbon that has been released in Birmingham in the last 100 years. I can't guarantee that there haven't been people out in the mountains doing their own thing. And I've heard some stories about that. And lots of people come by and say, my grandfather, or I have my own thing. And we just kind of let that dog lay. So, but yeah, there is some history post-prohibition. However, most of the laws, or at least a lot of the laws that we still deal with on a daily basis, are post-prohibition, going back that far, and we still deal with some of that. So Alabama is lowercase conservative in a lot of ways, and I think this is one of those things that until the last 5 or 6 years, there had been nobody really looking to do anything like this. And I always attribute the brewery scene really has exploded in Birmingham. They had a free the hops movement years ago that kind of allowed more and more high gravity beer, because that wasn't even an option in Alabama. And because of the laws of Alabama, if you're a manufacturer, you are by definition a manufacturer of beer. So a brewer, a manufacturer of wine, you are a winery, you manufacture distilled spirits, or distillery, any of those things, which is why we actually make a little bit of beer. We don't sell it outside the distillery. But because those guys got there first and they really wanted to move that brewery movement forward, that kind of dragged the distillery industry, even though it didn't exist, along, and kind of allowed what we ended up doing many years later to flourish. Because without that, one, we wouldn't have had the proof of concept and known that that was really going to work. But also, it would have been very difficult from a legislative standpoint to, chop through all that red tape. So even though we don't necessarily do the same thing, the brewery industry in Birmingham really cleared the way for us.
Were there any? So there's Jack Daniels, and I'll be honest. So this episode's gonna come out a few weeks after I was down in Tennessee to do a pick from them.
Okay,
and
cool.
I'll be honest, I went on the tour last time I was there and this time, and it's the first time that they mentioned Alabama, that they had distilled in Birmingham when they couldn't in Lynchburg. And as far as I know, no one has any bottles remaining. Like, they haven't found any. But besides that, are there any kind of pre-prohibition Alabama distillers who we might know the names of, or anything like that, or was it just not a huge, or
Yeah,
rather, was it all wiped out?
as far as I know, there weren't too many. The Clyde Mays story, which you referenced before, that story exists pre-prohibition, although my knowledge of it, though limited, is that it wasn't in the full scale production even the way that it is now. So I think, as is often the case with distillery brands, the legend kind of takes on a life of its own.
Sure.
And so I think, and that's probably not untrue of many places or many distilleries. I think maybe it wasn't even thought of in the same way pre-prohibition, because it was just kind of a omnipresent thing. It was just something that people had. And then when they tried to legislate it away, then people started paying attention to where were these things located, who was doing it, who's doing it better, who's doing it the right way. And so I'm sure there were a lot of distilleries, but I think the critical part to what happened in Alabama, or Birmingham specifically, is that because it was so draconian in terms of the laws that came in with prohibition, even when it was repealed, a lot of those things stayed. There are still to this day dry counties in Alabama. You can't buy alcohol in the county that I live on Sunday. And so there are definitely still, and that's, those are political things that last to today. But it's not as though as soon as prohibition ended, everything went back to, boom times of the Great Gatsby. It's still been a pretty hard industry to crack into. And being a control state, which Alabama still is, one of the few that still are, that makes it challenging. I mean, we face challenges, and I think I my business partner and I may have been somewhat naive when we started this whole thing to thinking that, well, nobody has started this business in Alabama because they never thought of it. Like it wasn't so much that, it was that there's some uphill battle that we've had to fight to do this in Alabama, but that makes the reward all the more sweet, because I think we really have accomplished something. We really feel like we've done something. We didn't just copy what some other people were doing with a slightly different brand. We really tried to do something special in a place that didn't have this before. So, and there are a few, you mentioned, there are a few other distilleries in Alabama now. We are definitely the largest from a production capacity standpoint, as well as a product diversification standpoint. We kind of run the gamut. But I think that is also sort of indicative of a pre-prohibition story. There were some smaller people doing this, but we didn't have what would later become Jack Daniels or Maker's Mark or things like that. I don't think Alabama has a history like that.
Fair enough. And so with that all in mind, and bearing in mind, you said you might have been a little naive to do it in Alabama, but you've made it work. So why Alabama in the first place? And why Birmingham specifically too?
Good question. So I went to high school in Birmingham, so that's partially that reason for me. Although after college, I went to Auburn University, played football there, and I worked in the film industry for a while. So I was totally not a part of the Birmingham culture, Alabama culture. I moved away, but my parents stayed in Birmingham, and so that was always where I came back for Thanksgiving, Christmas, holidays, things like that. And so as I traveled back, I was actually living in New York at the time, and I traveled back to Birmingham, and I would see, this brewery would pop up, or this bar would pop up, or they moved the minor league baseball stadium downtown, which I remember thinking at the time was crazy. Why would they do that? Nobody's ever going to go down there. I knew more about Manhattan when I was in high school than I knew about downtown Birmingham. It was just, that's not where people went, at least at the time. And then slowly over time, there's always an industry down there. Banking, finance was down there. There's a medical community down there. But then it really became a more interactive, more active community, I guess, downtown area, the central business district. And so seeing that, I started to see like, hey, this is a cool bar. It's not a cool bar for Birmingham. You didn't have that kind of qualifier anymore, where this was cool for, okay, yeah, it's Birmingham. It was like, this is a cool place. This is a great restaurant. And the restaurant industry in Birmingham has been good forever. Since Frank Stitt opened his several restaurants, he has created a tree in Birmingham of fine dining restaurants that are, I would question anybody to find a better concentration of restaurants in a town 5 times bigger than Birmingham. There are certainly places that have, your New Yorks and your Los Angeles, Chicago, but from a size standpoint, Birmingham much far outkicks its, coverage in terms of the hospitality restaurant industry. And so we knew that the people were there. We knew that there was a palate for some of this. And so seeing the brewery scene really grow up, the craft cocktail culture, alongside the restaurant industry, 10 years ago, if you would have said, can you get somebody to pay $12 for a cocktail in downtown Birmingham? I would have laughed at you. That like, there wasn't a market for that. And then here we are. We are a part of that now. Not only do we do it, but a lot of places do it, and it's been very successful, that entire industry. So I think, again, we saw what was happening. There was something happening that we wanted to be a part of, and that we realized, the brewery thing has happened. The cocktail bar culture is growing up. The restaurant scene has been here. What can we do that's a little different? What can we add to this culture? And many of the places that I had been to that I like traveling to, Denver had a great influence on me. You saw that brewery culture happen first, and then it was followed by the distillery culture. So for me, it was white space. I always was interested in entrepreneurship. This was always kind of a type of business that I wanted to get into. The brand is more what I have been involved with passionately as far as the distillery is concerned. My business partner is a chemical engineer by degree, so that's where his brain kind of goes to the more scientific side of this. And so I think we've been a good yin and yang as far as that goes. And we met as a result of my playing football in college. He is an orthopedic surgeon, and so I joke that if you play football for long enough, you get to know orthopedic surgeons well, and I certainly have. And so that kind of started our friendship. And then after many years had gone by, we kind of had similar tastes and aspirations, and that's what led us to doing this.
And I do have to mention, so that business partner Jeff has. I had a thought that if he were to come on, I would have to ask him a question about that because I'm a huge baseball fan.
Oh, nice.
So Andrew's sports medicine has had
Speaks to all your favorite players.
yeah, let's say that it's definitely had an impact on him. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, sometimes it has fixed more than not. They're all successful surgeries. It's about the players, but I'm also
Yeah.
a Mets fan, so we've had more than our share. So, um, pardon me, I'll cut that. I have a cough I can't get rid of.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, so you mentioned there are pretty draconian distilling laws in Alabama, and uh, when when were you able to, or when was anyone really able to start distilling? As you mentioned that you had the beer movement grow up, but if, correct me if I'm wrong, we've seen in a couple of states like you got beer that was okay, then wine was okay, but distilleries and spirits sometimes take that extra
Yeah.
step, you know?
Sure. Well, I think part of that, at least, I don't know what disincentivized people prior to us, to beat us to this. And we certainly weren't the first. I mean, even post-prohibition, John Emerald and Opelika had been open for quite a while before we had been. There are several other small distilleries that had been doing this, but I think it was the commercial scale that one, just the financial input to that is significant to build a distillery at a scale of ours. Costs a lot of money. I mean, that's the way it goes. But also, I think partially it was Alabama has the fourth highest excise tax in the country. And so I think from anybody who had done the numbers or the diligence on this in a very large way, you look at the bigger, distillery brands and where would they expand or try to open different locations. They would look at that and say that's not hospitable to a national brand growth. And so that certainly I think was a intimidating factor for people who may be looking to do this and didn't necessarily care about Birmingham, but were saying, where can we find an opportunity in a growing community and build this business that we want to build? Because I've heard that across the country. I was lucky to travel to many distilleries and met those people who said, hey, I've made some money working in finance or whatever, and I hated it, so I want to do this now. And I chose this place because of whatever, but this is the business I was going to start no matter what. Alabama wasn't on that list of places because it would be harder for them to, find success. So I think we kind of made a sacrifice in that regard because we wanted to do this in Birmingham more than anything else that was a factor. And we hoped that with as much positive change that we had seen even to when we were getting started, that we could, maybe continue some of that change and say, now that there are people here asking for this, now that we want to change the way things have been done previously, we're knocking on the door. Maybe they'll be responsive. And to be honest, they have. As I mentioned, Alabama is a control state, so we have the ABC. They're the kind of governing body, and I mean they're good to us. They try to be as helpful as they can. Sometimes it's within the confines of the law, and things just can't work. And so then we talk about how to change those things. And sometimes it's nobody's asked that question before, and we have to figure that out. And so we kind of it's a little bit of a hand in glove situation where we're figuring out together.
So I'm going to jump a question for a second, which is your national tour of distilleries. I want to talk about that in a second. But before I do, you mentioned that opening a distillery, there's a pretty big financial hurdle or barrier to entry. And as far as I've kind of seen as I keep doing these interviews, I've kind of identified three paths that a new distillery can take. First one is you, from one reason or another, you have financial backing so that you can just sit on the liquid until it's ready. You've got the money in the bank, whatever it may be, but that's the situation. The second one is you produce
spirit that will become whiskey, but you also produce gin, clear spirits, other faster maturing products, alcoholic and non-alcoholic. It's kind of keep things running, keep the lights on in the meantime. And then the third one is that you create a location that is a destination. Sometimes it's a restaurant or bar on site or both that drives people in, and it creates excitement about this product that is to come, uh, while again, kind of like option two, keeping the lights on in the meantime. And from what I've kind of seen of Dread River, it seems like you have a mix of two and three. They mix of creating the clear spirits and the faster aging, but also creating a destination spot for people to go to. So how did that business plan kind of come about?
Yeah, that's right. Great observation. And yes, we do. The financial component of all of those things is sort of the most significant, because you're right. No matter two or three, you still have to be doing one. That's the ultimate goal here. So how do you pay for that? And as I mentioned, in Alabama, not only do you have to you are a brewery or a winery, you're a distillery, but that means you can't serve at any location. Even if you didn't have a location, if you were just giving the tour and tasting, you can't have anything other than your products. So I think that's why a lot of other people hadn't really gone down your third path, because you couldn't serve Jack Daniels, you couldn't serve Tito's, you couldn't serve beer, Budweiser, because you're not allowed to have any of those things because of the three-tier system in Alabama. So rather than making that a hindrance, and I came from a experiential marketing background, live event production, and I had lived in New York, as I mentioned. And so that kind of, hey, this culture is shifting in Birmingham. Do you think maybe it's time to bring a new blood venue type of thing into this whole atmosphere? It's not the brewery. It's not sit outside at the picnic table with your dog and play cornhole, which is fine. I mean, but we have that. There's a lot of those. There's a lot of places where you can do that. So what is the next evolution of this distilling by process? Is more refined. There's more detail to it. It's a higher proof spirit. So like, how can we take that concept of what we're doing and kind of make it that next iteration with Birmingham? So that's where that front of the house space comes from. And we took the limitation of saying, we can't have any of these other spirits. You can't have vermouth. You can't have Campari or Aperol or Chartreuse or whatever. And we made it into a bar and restaurant. And so we squeeze all our juices fresh. We make excellent cocktails, but we do it all back in our kitchen. So, and we need, espresso martinis had their moment there for a while, or maybe we still are in that moment. I'm not sure. I don't drink them, but we had
me neither, but they're still very much around. Sorry, continue.
I have a feeling, yeah, I really haven't gone anywhere. For me, they never really caught on. But we'll reverse engineer, our own version of Kahlua, a coffee liqueur. We'll do our own things like that. We have 190 and we've got all the kitchen stuff, so we just have to kind of figure out how to do that, and then that gives us the opportunity to make whatever we want. It's a lot harder, but it also gives us the way to, again, as I view that space, it's brand mecca. So when you come here, you get that experience. You're supposed to understand what the brand is and what we represent, who we are. You're supposed to be able to try the products and understand the quality that goes into those, and the best way that we can express that is by letting you try them, whether that's in the tasting on the tour, whether that's in a cocktail at the bar. And so that's the purpose of this. And it's to give you the best possible expression of our products and our brand is that place. So wherever else we go and whatever events we may be a part of, when you come there, you're supposed to really get the indoctrination into the culture. And so having to do everything from, very beginning to end is definitely harder. There's no question about that. And I would even add maybe to your, and I'm sure you left this out on purpose, but we also learned very early in this process that maybe there are a couple things before even your 3 points that you laid out. Not every distillery has a still. Not every distillery puts the white dog in the barrels and waits for a long time. Or I guess I should say, not every brand does that. And so that was very important to us too. We wanted to make sure that we were producing these products. We weren't buying them all from MGP and going through that process and putting a brand on it, which, if I'm being totally honest, when we started, that was like a a dirty little secret, and people were looking at the back of bottles and saying, is this from Indiana? Where's this from? That just didn't, not for us. We didn't exist yet, but like that was the culture. I
Mhm.
feel like, and maybe you disagree, but I feel like now it's like that is so pervasive. People
Mhm.
are just kind of like, yeah, I mean, we've resigned ourselves to the fact that, everybody does that to some degree. And so that's been a kind of seismic shift in the consciousness in this business, because I didn't realize that that's what people were thinking up to this point. So yeah, we're still grain to glass, which makes everything a lot harder, a lot more complicated. But we're proud of that. So
Yeah, I was thinking about the timeline as you said that. You're officially starting in 17,
yes.
but obviously you would have been thinking about it beforehand and looking into the industry and all of that. And yeah, that would have been about the time when people would have looked at like, um, for example, Templeton or other brands that got caught sourcing and not telling,
Sure.
basically. And I should say, for what it's worth, um, I, I actually love the Templeton 10 year now, but they're also very transparent now that it's from Indiana. So yeah, so that makes sense that it was kind of the dirty little secret around that time. Now, as you say, I mean, you see Indiana on the back, it's MGP. You see Tennessee on the back. Now you have to think about whether it's Dickel or Tennessee Distilling Group, but
Right.
options are few and far between. Um, there's one other part that I wanted to ask you about there, which uh, it was that in creating your own, having to create all of your own materials and additional cocktail components, let's say, and other products. uh you're reminding me of a conversation I had a few dozen episodes ago now with Driftless Glen
Mhm.
in Wisconsin, and they have to do the same thing there. I think they have somewhat less restrictive laws on distilling overall, but if you're going to be a if you're going to be a distiller, you have to distill or create everything on site. So they have to make their own, like you said, the Aperol type things, the
Right.
vermouths, all of that. And uh, you know, as such, did that kind of let me rephrase this question. Did the cocktail part become part of the culture organically, or did you kind of have to start with that as part of the culture that you wanted to create and go in? So, kind of at what point where did you
Yeah,
decide to make the rest of the things?
it's a little bit of both. Because I feel like we knew going into this that if we were going to go down the event space route, if that was part of what our business plan was going to be, part of our revenue generating strategy was to have events at the distillery. And to be honest, and I know we might talk about this in a minute, but I traveled to quite a few places, and one of my questions to the distilleries that and I could not have planned for a more collegial industry. I mean, the people that I met in this industry, I would, email out of the blue. They don't know me, and I'm like, "Hey, man, I'm coming to Denver, and I would love to check out your place. I'm starting a distillery." And to a man, it was like, "Go, come by anytime. Happy to show you around. Spend 2 hours, talking through the process." And at many of those trips, I would, ask my series of questions, one of which was always, what do you know now that you wish you would have known then, or what would you have done differently had you, had this 2 years of experience before you started? And obviously got a lot of answers to that question, but one that came up many, many times was, I wish I would have been able to anticipate our need for event space, because people just like it here. They just think it's
Mhm.
cool. They want to come and have their birthday party or their wedding reception. We've had numerous actual wedding ceremonies at the distillery, which I have consistently been surprised by. And so that was something that we already wanted to do. I wasn't front loading that question. I was just kind of curious, and I got that information back. And so I was like, okay, we're on the right track here with this. So we knew we wanted to have the space. And then at the beginning, I won't lie, we viewed all of that restriction, as a limitation, to say, we hired an extremely talented mixologist at the beginning of this, a local guy. And I mean, people still ask about cocktails by name that he made back, when we opened in 2019, because he was doing really incredible stuff. And about a week, 10 days or so before we opened, we had gotten some bad information, and we're told you can use whatever you want. As long as you buy it from the ABC store, you can use anything, all the stuff, that they have. So he makes this 100 cocktails. I'm not exaggerating. It was incredible. He worked on it for months. And then they're going through the kind of final check process, and they're like, wait, no, you guys can't use alcohol that you don't manufacture, which we knew from before, but we asked and they told us that we could. And I mean, he had to scrap the entire cocktail thing like 10 days before we opened and start over, and had nothing other than the few, because we didn't even have the full line of products that we have now, the few spirits that we had to work with. And he, I don't think he slept for a while there, but still made some incredible cocktails that people still love. And it was kind of, I think at that point when we realized, like, again, pure entrepreneurship here, when you say, okay, we have this curveball and there's nothing we can really do about it. How are we going to make lemonade? And so my phrase in this business, because I like to do this personally, is, we turn lemons into limoncello. That's kind of what we do. That's our whole process. And so I think we always knew we wanted to do cocktails, but we've really kind of been more creative or more front loaded that now that we've said, look, this isn't necessarily a limitation. We know what our products taste like. We know what we want you to get out of them. And so if we craft you a cocktail that expresses this spirit in the best possible way, that's your best opportunity to try it and like it. And so we've taken that not only there on site at the distillery in the tasting room, but we'll do events now. We'll do, cocktail syrups. We'll have things so that our business is very liquor to lips. That's kind of the key point of this. You have to let people try things. And we live in Alabama. It's the summertime. It's 90 degrees, and we go and do a tasting, and it's room temperature gin. Not everybody's going to love that. And so if we can do it in a way that lets you try it in a way that you are going to like, and you may want to try 120 proof whiskey in August outside, but somebody next to you doesn't like it that way. So we try to give it to them in a way that they like too, so that no matter how you like to drink our products, we found a way that you do like to drink them.
I mean, it makes sense. And it helps, of course, that your space is a beautiful space. I mean, I've only seen the outside of it from just pictures and stalking on Google Maps, but it's a beautiful Tuscan-style building. Looks like a villa. It's got everything you'd want in an event space, let alone a distillery. And being honest, when I think about like in-town distilleries around the country, really, I mean, unless the town kind of grew up around the distillery, in which case it's a very old distillery,
right?
Most of them are converted garages, or they're industrial buildings, things like that. So more of a functional space than an event space. So they're not going to hold weddings in certain distilleries that I've been in, most distilleries that I've been in, that aren't the big heritage guys. So I mean, that being said, I do want to ask, before I go to the who did you visit question, which is, let's say that you decided you really wanted to create a distillery. You wanted to do everything that you've now achieved, but the space available to you was more of the kind of, if you will, the converted garage or the industrial space. Would you have taken that in order to achieve the, let's say, primary part of the dream?
This month's Impact Spotlight is on White Heather and McNair's blended whiskeys, and the tales of the two men who made these venerable brands what they are. The first is Billy Walker, a 2021 Icons of Whiskey Hall of Fame inductee and owner of the Glenallachie, another Impex brand and a recent podcast guest. Billy has over 5 decades of experience in the Scotch world. With White Heather unshow-filtered blended whiskey, Billy returns to his roots. White Heather was relaunched in 2021 with a 21-year-old blended Scotch, and is now joined by a 15-year-old edition. Both feature 47% single malt in their blend and draw from top stocks in Islay, Speyside, and the Highlands. The 15-year-old is matured in American and Spanish oak casks for a beautiful blend of honey, malt, wispy smoke, and candied citrus. The 21-year-old is matured in American oak and sherry butts for 18 years, before a final 3 years in PX and Oloroso puncheons. This is plus time in medium toast and medium char Appalachian oak for a final burst of sweetness and complexity. The second story is of Harvey McNair. McNair was the essence of a Victorian Scotsman. He accomplished many trades and travels in his lifetime, And more than anything, he loved and championed the natural, unadulterated color of whiskey. Pure gold, as he called it. Pure gold was the foundation of the whiskey blends he created. Today's McNair Unchill-filtered blended whiskey, thanks to Billy Walker, honors Harvey's legacy, marrying peated malt, Highland, Islay, and Speyside with Glenallachie spirit. This is a blend for the peat lovers. To find all of these whiskeys and any Impex product, visit a premium spirits retailer near you. You can also visit Impex at www.impexbev.com or email office@impexbev.com for those harder to find releases. The Whiskey Ring podcast is proudly sponsored by Impex Beverages.
Well, I don't want to get charged for not being legit. Our distillery isn't a converted garage. So
fair enough. Okay,
there are two buildings. So you would not know this by the pictures, but basically there are two buildings back to back. And the space that you're talking about that you've seen, the Tuscan-style building, which is very unusual in Birmingham. It's a beautiful building. I cannot tell you the number of times when we were renovating it, people would walk by and say, "Oh, what are you guys doing here? I always wanted this to be my, office or my whatever their dream for the space was." And I was like, "Well, I wanted it to be a distillery, so I hope you like that." But the other side of the space where actually the distilling occurs was an automotive repair shop. That's funny of all the things. I feel like you probably did your research and you're just trying to, play that down like you didn't know that of all the things that you could have chosen. That's what it was.
No, honest to God, I really, because I'm thinking about, and maybe these are some of the places you visit. We'll get into that, but I'm thinking of like some of the ones in New York where Kings County is not this. They have the Navy Yard and they have a nicer brick, old brick building from the 1800s, but some of the other ones I like, Van Brunt, New York Distilling Company does a great rye. They're producing great stuff, but they're in industrial spaces.
I think in New York, I lived in New York. I love New York. I consider it more home even than Birmingham, just because it feels like me. But you kind of have to play the hand you're dealt in a lot of ways. And New York is hard because there's not a lot of space. Even the places that you're like, the Brooklyn Navy Yard, like that's one of the only places that has big open space. We used to film movies out there. And that's for the same reason. One, it's cool because you can do period movies back there, but also they've got space that nobody else has. Red Hook. I feel like that's Red Hook. When I lived in New York, Red Hook was like a pretty well kept secret over there for artists and lofts and cool stuff going on. I feel like the secret's out now, but I feel like that's the kind of, unless you're in a place like that, like where are you going to open a distillery in Manhattan? It doesn't work like that.
Places are now doing that, but it's tough. It's pretty tough.
I think that we were lucky. We looked at many different spaces going into this project, and as anyone who has started a business, maybe not anyone, but anybody who's not lying, will tell you that we got very familiar with the term scope creep. We got to be like scope sprinting at certain points, because when we started the idea, to your question, what were we willing to sacrifice for that? We had a, 7,000 square foot space in mind because we were starting a distillery. We are now in a 27,000 square foot building, and we talk all the time about how we run out of space constantly. So the one thing that I would say about that we knew would be a limitation, no matter what space we found or what its previous occupant was, in a downtown CVB area, like you don't have the space to, mill your own grain and put all the stuff. Like if you had a farm or something, like a lot of distilleries, Kentucky distilleries sometimes are. So that was going to be a restriction no matter what. We're going to have to get trucks in and out of there. We're going to have to drive people to a downtown area. It was going to be more landlocked. So though, having said all of that, we didn't want to be such a destination that you had to, take a weekend trip just to come see us, 20 minutes outside of Birmingham. We knew that the action that we were going to get was here, and we needed to be in the downtown area. And so what became the hardest part was finding a space that was big enough to do both of the things that we wanted to do, and not have to sacrifice both of them. And I think there was one other place that we were looking at, and we chose our space because we felt that place was a better fit for a brewery, not ideal for a distillery. And so we chose the space that we're in, and that other space is a brewery now. So go figure.
Makes sense. He says,
Yeah.
no, I promise you, I really had not, I had done the research, but not that
Yeah.
close of research on
Well,
the,
your intuition is
like,
good.
yeah. Another one I was just thinking of that also speaks to a similar story that you had of like how much space you're going to need and all that is Fort Hamilton. They're down in Brooklyn in Industry City.
Mhm.
And I mean, Industry City now, it's become kind of like Chelsea Market. And I know we're throwing
Yeah.
around some inside places here, but
Go
how
visit these places in New York. They're
yeah,
cool.
really do go visit. They are cool. You'll spend a lot of money, but it's really cool. And
Yeah.
it's a converted like 6 buildings in a row that were all industrial. Some still kind of are, but now they have all shops on the first and second floor, and um, you know, bazaars and toy shops and food, tons of food, and all that. And so Fort Hamilton has a space there. It's run by Alex Clark. He was a big cocktail guy, big whiskey guy, and I remember going to do a story on them when they were first opening up. Like they opened 2 weeks after I did the story, and ever since then they've grown. They've started a new still. They've been getting bigger barrels and all of that. But ultimately, he actually was kind of saved by COVID in a way because he, I guess, leased a space in the buildings and leased a space next door for a barrel room for a
Mhm.
place to mature. And as you can imagine, all sorts of fire codes they had to go through to do that, even in a building that was primarily made of concrete
Yeah.
and wasn't going anywhere. Um, but because of COVID, a lot of the businesses that were going to take those adjacent spaces, including at least one brewery, actually did not
Mm.
take those spaces, and they
Interesting.
became available. And he was able to say, "All right, well, we're growing faster than we thought we were. Let's lease that space, and we'll fill it up with barrels and all that." So it's a very real thing. If you tend to outgrow your facility pretty quickly, especially if you start seeing success and growing. So it's mirror story, New York, Brooklyn, Birmingham. It's it all comes together. So
A great catch 22 in this industry.
yeah,
The more successful you are, the more space you need. And that, I think that would be the biggest limiting factor in my estimation. Not that I know of being in New York would be, we're running out of barrel storage. We are out of barrel storage and we have, a lot more space than we even thought we needed. I don't talk about getting upside down in your bourbon costs at the per square foot cost of Brooklyn or anywhere in New York these days. But at the same time, your opportunities to market your product to people and the bars and restaurants you can get in, and New York tends to be a pretty loyal in terms of creative support structure. So, yeah, I admire what we did was not easy, and working in a state that is not necessarily amenable to things like this was a huge challenge. But doing something like this, in 5 boroughs is a whole different animal. So props to those guys.
so that makes me think of a question that I hadn't planned on asking, but kind of makes sense, which is, look, I come from a bias of I'm around New York. There's, as you know, there's cocktail bars, there's bars, just period, everywhere. Every restaurant has a cocktail menu and all of this. So I don't know at all what the culture is like in Birmingham and Alabama and more generally. But was you said earlier that there was an appetite for spirits. You saw it in the beer industry, and you could kind of see it growing into the spirits industry. So,
Mhm.
what was kind of a what was the point that kind of convinced you that you could not only have the distillery and create a distillery, but that there was truly an appetite? Like what convinced you that that was true?
Sure. Well, I think again, not I am the last person to draw similarities between Birmingham and New York, but not too long ago, and this was before my cocktail time, but not too much before it. The cocktail culture in at least in America, if not globally, was not the way it is now. I mean, mixology was not a job title. I mean, no one did that, and cocktails were one and ones or Tom Collins or whatever. It was not on the forefront. There weren't entire places dedicated just to this the way there are now. And I think that places like Death and Company in New York, Honest to God, Pegu Bar, those places that really put the cocktail focus at the forefront, if not the exclusivity of what they were doing, started a movement that now we just recognize as being, offhand. Everybody cocktail menu, like you said. I mean, you can't. Where can I have your cocktail menu? It's just natural. Of course, you have a cocktail menu. You have to, and you have to have a person, if not multiple people, to execute that cocktail menu on your staff. So following that tradition, like New York was, we have the hospitality industry, we have the food industry, and I think those fine dining places were always making cocktails. I think that was a part of their culture. It was just, unless you were going to that place, you were going to a bar, and you were getting a beer or you were getting a vodka soda or whiskey, ginger, or whatever. And like I said, not that long ago, people were not paying for, an old fashioned probably feels right about the speed of where Birmingham is right now. Like, it's a cocktail to be sure, but it's not really stretching its boundaries too much. And I'm not saying that the cocktail culture in Birmingham is that way, but I think the people have gotten to be where it's like, I know what cocktail I order when I go out, and it's this. And all of the bartenders, the mixologists, the venues are kind of dragging people along and saying, like, okay, if you like that, let me try this. And there's a place in Birmingham, the Collins Bar, that is, at least as far as I am concerned, and I don't want to be disrespectful to all the bar restaurants, the restaurant bars that existed long before this. But Andrew Collins opened a bar, been quite a few years ago now, and it's all mixology. They don't have a cocktail menu, ironically, and it's what do you like? And they have everything, and they have all the bitters and the tinctures and the aperitifs and everything. And they say, I like fruity, I like sweet, I like this, I like bitter, whatever. And they'll, what spirit do you like? And they kind of put it together for you like that. And then no two cocktails are the same. Which, again, you're saying this like, yeah, I go to that place every weekend. But there wasn't one. There was not a place like that. There wasn't even a dedicated cocktail bar, let alone one that said, we don't have a menu, you just have to tell us what you like. And so I think, I don't know the origin of that, but that was one of those places that I would come back to, and I was like, this is a cool bar. I would hang out here. I'd go here in New York. I like this bar. And they do a cool thing. And so I think those guys, to a very small group of people at the beginning and then concentrically out from there, kind of introduced people to cocktails don't have to be a gin and tonic. That's not what we're talking about. And if you don't like that, I'll make you something else. And then it kind of helped people understand that I have to input some into this, and maybe I don't understand. Maybe I don't really not like gin. I just don't like it in that format. Maybe gin's something that I do like. I've just been doing it wrong. And so I think that the education component, while maybe that wasn't really what they were planning to do, I think they brought a lot of people along a journey of kind of realizing cocktails are cool.
Hey, fair enough. I'll be honest. I had this conversation while I was down in Nashville, actually, that I don't really drink straight whiskey when I'm out anymore.
Yeah.
It's just not because most of the stuff that I want to drink, I have at home or is otherwise too expensive. I mean,
Sure. Yeah.
we stopped at a bar that like had something I really, really like. Like I would happily buy a bottle of. It's $100 a pour. I was like, I'm good. Thank you. But no. But what I do when I go out, I usually get a cocktail.
Yeah.
Because I'm just not someone who drinks cocktails enough at home that I've got all the ingredients. And it's going to sound snobby, but the cocktails that I tend to like the most have a lot of ingredients.
Sure.
I love a Corpse Reviver #2. That's my go-to right now. And that's got 5 or 6 things in it.
Right.
Even an old fashioned, like I don't have orange peel around me all the time.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
I'm into the other stuff, but like, give me a break. I don't have the orange peel. I had to order sugar cubes.
A bottle of vermouth or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Like vermouth does. It does go bad after a while. It may take a few months, but that's how long it takes me to go through a cocktail.
Yeah,
so,
it will go bad in my refrigerator.
Right. Exactly. So I have learned to kind of appreciate the cocktail culture in reverse because that's what I drink when I go out. Sure. But it's also exposed me to some really interesting especially like house blends of things. And I would imagine coming down to Dread River and just looking at the cocktail menu and saying, all right, I like this. Let me try some of the stuff. And having it be your own ingredients is both cool for the consumer, but it must also be cool for you, knowing that, like you said, you know exactly what every product tastes like.
Sure.
You know the
Well,
profile.
that's exactly the way. So I mentioned Death and Company before, and that being the, one of the godfathers of the cocktail culture. But one of my trips back to New York while Dread River was in its kind of creation, I borrowed, if not flat out stole, a lot of inspiration from places that I loved in New York. So when we were building out the way the front of the house space looks, oh, that was really, I love this element of this place or this place or this place. The Bowery Hotel, for example, is one of my favorite buildings in New York. It looks like it's been there since the 40s, and it's been there since like 1998 or something, which is so cool because they did such a great job of like creating this. Bob Dylan stayed here back in the day, and it was like they weren't even around. But really cool places that I would, go take ideas from. And one of those things I specifically bought the Death and Company cocktail book Bible from there, so I could give it a kind of as a gift and say like, hey, this is my like passing of the torch, not so much to take the cocktails, but understand the way these people think about cocktails. They are taking spirits and ancillary products and blending them together in a way that don't tell me that this is a limitation, something that we can't do, because they're turning this list of ingredients into this cocktail, and it's a transformative alchemy. And that's, again, part of our process. That's our symbol, is the alchemical symbol for aqua vitae, water of life. And so alchemy has always kind of been a secondary thought process here. Obviously fermentation, distillation, process of alchemy, but just that kind of turning something that used to be something else into something arguably more valuable, hopefully more valuable, is a cool concept to our whole business. And so, again, faced with that, we took this building that had been empty for 10 years, and we turned it into what it is now. We did something that people thought you couldn't do in Alabama, and we've turned it into what we've done. We had this limitation of not being able to make great cocktails, even though that's what we wanted to do. So we figured out a way to do it. So again, I'm not, to the entrepreneurs listening to this, I'm not telling them anything they don't already know. That's just the way it goes. You got to be persistent when it comes to things like that. You're going to hit roadblocks. And we hit a lot. We bumped our head a number of times. But oftentimes we also found that people didn't know the answer to our question, and we just had to keep moving forward. So if we didn't get a yes, or we got an I don't know, we said, well, here's how it works. We'll tell you. And they said, okay, well, that sounds good. Let's do it. So yeah, I guess that's the alchemy of being an entrepreneur. You got to turn a no into a yes.
Yeah, fair enough. So before we go too down a rabbit hole, and I don't want to keep you all night because I have tons of questions, but let's jump into so depending on the outlet, and I listened to a couple of different ones and read a few different ones. So between when you had the idea and you wanted to open a distillery and you went on this national tour to different distilleries, I've seen numbers between 30 and 50 distilleries that you visited. Which ones do you think were kind of the most helpful or influential in getting to where you wanted to be?
Man, I thought you were going to say I needed to rattle them all off, and I was like, oh boy, here we go. Like I said before, Denver was it was definitely my first stop, and I went there several times. And so there were a number of distilleries. I think Laws, which I don't know if you know those guys, but that was literally, I think, the first distillery that I went to as a part of this process. And those guys were super cool. I went to Stranahan's, which is right down the street, Leopold Brothers, obviously, with those guys. Family Jones is in Denver. Those guys were super good to me. Really, really cool. There's a couple of places out. There's a distillery called Marble Distilling Company in Carbondale, Colorado, where the husband and wife have the distillery, but they also operate an inn as a part of it. So unlike our event space, they kind of have a little inn that they use for the same reasons we do. But they're very sustainable. They created this system where they reclaim all of their water from their mash process. Obviously, they use the spent grain, they feed cattle and all that stuff. But they have a closed loop water system, which I just found fascinating. I tried to implement that in Birmingham, but for reasons we don't have to get into, Alabama is not Colorado when it comes to sustainability opportunities. So spent some time there, went to Woody Creek out there, Aspen, went to 10th Mountain, Breckenridge. So, I spent a lot of time at distilleries in Colorado. Spent some time in California also. I was at Cutwater while they were still under construction randomly. I had gone to Ballast Point Brewery because I didn't really know if there were any other distilleries kind of in the neighborhood. And the guys were like, yeah, well, Cutwater. And they kind of explained the story and sent me this guy's email. And so I, like I do, I email this random person who I've never met, and he's like the man over there. And he happened to be traveling, and he was like, here, I'll give you the number for this guy. And walk around, they showed me all around wearing the hard hat. They got their giant Vendome still that's brand new. I mean, nothing's even constructed. And so I don't know who these guys are. I've never heard Cutwater. That sounds cool. Now everybody knows who they are and all that they have accomplished, and they, own the canned cocktail game. And it was just kind of cool, to be a part of that. And then probably my two biggest, I don't want to say mentors because we were never that close, but when I had a question, I would reach out to Pat Heist and Shane Baker from Wilderness Trail. And I got to them through, I think I reached out to like Western Kentucky had a distillery program as a part of their curriculum. And I got to a professor there and said, hey, what can we do to, work together? I'm looking for answers. And he gave me these guys because they had a company called Firm Solutions, which provides, yeast and enzymes and things like that to distilleries. And so I'm like, well, okay, that sounds like it's important. Sure. And so he gives me these two guys information. And I mean, every time I'm just, again, cold email them, hey guys, here's who I am, here's what I'm trying to do. Would love to be able to just link up and connect. And they were so gracious. And I mean, I would send them emails back and be like, hey, I'm having a problem. And it would be, pretty complicated problem. And I'd say, I really don't know how to solve, whatever it is. 24 hours max later, I'd get back a dissertation on the topic that I asked about. And I'm like, from one or the other of them. And I'm like, never met these guys. And they don't know me. And they're like giving me this just sage and top-notch advice. And I really appreciated, that they are sort of my, and they're not the only ones, all these people that I have mentioned, that's the distilling industry for me. I staved off going to Louisville for, probably 2 or 3 years into this process, not for any reason other than like when I would send my blanket emails looking for people to, help me, I didn't hear back from, Buffalo Trace. I didn't hear back from Woodford Reserve, which wasn't really expecting to. Those guys are huge. They're not doing what I'm doing. It's a completely different game. And so I did obviously go through that whole trail process at a certain point and found it to be extremely informative, if not a little bit more sterile. I was accustomed to like having the cell phone number of the guy who's doing the distilling and going watching him work, where as with those things, I'm taking the tour like everybody else. So it was a little bit of a different process. But when Marianne Eves was at Castle and Key, we spent a lot of time there one day. And then our two biggest influences, the Defusky Island Rum Company, which is on a little island off the coast of Hilton Head, South Carolina, is kind of where this idea started. So my business partner had a house there, and he got to know Tony Chase, and that's kind of what sparked this first idea. And then Asheville Distilling Company, Troy and Charlie Ball are who we bought our equipment from. Charlie and Troy Charlie's still on our board. They have been super helpful in terms of, answering all of our questions at any given point. That's more like nuts and bolts business stuff, not necessarily, going on the grand distillery tour. I spent some time in New York, went to a couple different places there. So really bounced around. And really anytime I was traveling within that kind of year and a half when we were getting started period, it was like, where's there a distillery here that I can check out and try to learn as much as I can. But I would say maybe 8 out of 10 times I'd email somebody and say, hey, here's kind of where I am and what I'm looking for. Can you answer any of these questions? And I'd get, come this day at this time, and I'm happy to talk to you as much as I can. And I'm like, I feel like I'm on an award speech. There's probably 20 places I didn't name that were equally as cool to me, when I was going through that process that I just, don't have committed to memory. But hopefully every now and then I get a chance to pay that forward.
No, I hear you. And some of the names you mentioned are ones that kind of come up over and over in that kind of question. So definitely Stranahan's comes up a lot, especially more, I would say, in the American single malt category, but just overall, that comes up a lot. Of course, Pat and Shane I've never had the opportunity to meet Shane, but I had Pat on as a guest in the 30s episodes, I want to say, something like that. But we got nerdy about yeast because I have a biochem background before I went heretic and went to medieval studies, but and now I'm a fundraiser. So no, they really do. And I've heard pretty much to a person when, especially with Pat and Shane, like if you've got a question, they will give you more answer than you could ever know what to do with, but it's great. Like they'll answer questions that you hadn't really thought of as part of your original question. So they're certainly going to be kind of godfathers of the next or the current distilling movement for sure.
The current wave, it feels like they have, and again, I only can really speak for myself as far as what I have experienced with them, but if that is true, and I assume it is, then they have played a huge influence on a number of different distilleries. And I think what you've seen with them and Wilderness Trail, what they've been able to accomplish, first of all, nobody deserves that more than they do. But also, I hope that that's a testament to you can be good to people, you can be profligate with your knowledge and your experience, and you can still be very successful. So it's not just for the love of the craft, and you got to struggle. Like those guys love the craft as much as anybody else does, and they've turned it into an extremely successful business. So they should be the model. I don't know who the model is. I'm not sure, but it should be them. I'm voting for them.
Hey, fair enough.
Hey folks, thanks for listening to another episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. If you like what you hear, please go ahead and click that subscribe, follow, or like button. Leave a rating and review on your podcast app of choice, and let me know what you want to hear. You can reach out to me through the podcast apps or email me at david@whiskeymyweddingring.com with any suggestions or ideas for new show guests. You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/whiskeymyweddingring. That's whiskey with an E, for as little as $1 a month. $5 a month gets you access to bonus content, including our soon-to-resume Under the Influencer series, and $25 a month means you join the Barrel Share Club. Each month, Barrel Share Club members get to try products sent to me for review, bottles from my own collection, and sometimes bottles that I just pick up because they're fun or interesting. Right now, only 5 spots remain in the Barrel Share Club, so grab your place today. Finally, please follow on Instagram. You can follow me at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or at Whiskey Ring Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Whiskey Ring. You can follow on Facebook at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or join the Facebook group, the Whiskey Ringers group. And I hope to see you there. Cheers, thank you for the support, and see you next time.